the days of quiet hands and hands down are over, my friend. OVER. Done. Because we want our children to stim. And today you are going to find out why. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to my channel. I am Rebecca Robbins, and I am the owner of MindShaper SLP and a speech language pathologist. And at MindShaper SLP, we help autistic individuals and their families lead fruitful and fulfilling lives. And today I am continuing in honor of Autism Acceptance Month. It's April as I record this, in case you're watching this at a later date. And I am continuing my videos for my Neurodiversity 101 playlist. Go check out the rest of the videos if you haven't already. And today we're going to talk about stimming and why we are not trying to stop your child from stimming and why stimming is a great thing for your child. That might be a little bit different than what you've heard in the past, especially if you come from a ABA background or verbal behavior background, or your child has received behavioral intervention services. I'm sure you're very familiar with the phrase hands down, quiet hands. Well, I'm here to tell you the days of quiet hands and hands down are over, my friend. OVER. Done. Because we want our children to stim. And today you are going to find out why. Let's just take it back a step. What is stimming? Stimming is a shorthand phrase for self-stimulatory behavior. And it is behavior that is used by a person to help regulate or stimulate their body or their sensory system in some way. Now, notice what I said, that it's there to help regulate. That is a big part of why we want to let our children to stim. But don't worry, we're going to get there. Before we get there, make sure you stay tuned all the way to the end, because I'm going to give you functional tips on what to do if stimming really is either unsafe or dangerous, or self-injurious, or if it's getting in the way, really getting in the way of you being able to interact with your child or your child engaging with their academic environment. So stay tuned to the end for that. But before we get there, I just want to start off by saying, everybody stims, y'all. Have you? I'm sure. Do you guys remember the book Everybody Poops? Well, we should make one that says everybody stims, because we do. The only difference is that neurotypical people stim in a different way that is deemed more socially appropriate than the ways that neurodivergent people tend to stim. And not only that, but when a neurotypical person stims, we tend to call it fidgeting, right? And it's accepted. It's not really frowned upon. I do it all the time. I'm a hair twirler. I also have a necklace that I wear that has all these little beads on it. And every time I wear it, I am doing this. Or I have gemstone necklaces that have a very smooth stone on the back. They're like big stones. And I'm constantly rubbing my thumb. That's self-stimulatory behavior. If you're bouncing your legs, chewing on your pen, that's all self-stimulatory behavior. The only difference is that when we do it, it's a little less obvious and it's more socially acceptable than in the way that an autistic person does it, or an autistic child participates in self-stimulatory behavior. And basically it all just boils down to that the way that neurotypical people stim is just more socially acceptable than the way neurodivergent people stim. And that's what we need to change. We need to change the narrative on that so that it seems less odd when we see an autistic person stimming, because there's nothing wrong with it and we all do it. Let's talk about the reasons why your autistic child is stimming. So one of the main functions or purposes of your child's stimming behavior is self-regulation. So self-regulation is when our bodies are regulated, we feel calm, we feel grounded, we feel safe, and it means that our brains are then available for higher level learning tasks or higher level cognitive tasks, because they're not bogged down with something feeling off in our body, whether it's like a pain or a sensory feeling. Stims help an autistic person regulate their system. Now, we read the very first book we read in my free autism book club called Rebecca's Awesome Reads. There's a link below if you want to join. It was called Uniquely Human by Barry Prezant. So this is the book. I think this is there's a more recent edition of the book out now, but this is the version that we read. And he says, he starts right off the book, right off the bat, by talking about dysregulation and stimming and how important stimming is for an autistic child. And he believes that difficulty staying well regulated emotionally and physiologically should be the core defining feature of autism. I'm going to say that one more time for the people in the back. Difficulty staying well regulated emotionally and physiologically, so how we're in our physical body, should be the core defining feature of autism. So basically, that's saying that it is just a part of the autistic experience that they are in almost a constant state of dysregulation, which is why there is that desire, that need to stim more so for a neurodivergent person or autistic person than it is for us as a neurotypical person. So he goes on to say, if you know a person with autism, consider what makes this person less able to stay well regulated. Problems in communicating. So basically, problems letting others know how you're feeling. Imagine if you had a stone in your shoe and you didn't have the ability to communicate to those around you that you had a stone in your shoe. That would make me really, really dysregulated. So that is a common experience for autistic children that don't have an ability to communicate what's happening in their physical state or just have limited language abilities. And they can't communicate what is wrong and what they need help with. So, problems in communicating, environments that are chaotic can be really dysregulating for an autistic person, especially if there's a lot of unexpected things happening in that environment. People who are confusing because they move and talk too quickly because of the way your autistic child's brain is wired. It is harder for them to process everything moving and changing so quickly, and that causes them to feel dysregulated. Unexpected change, excessive worry about things that are uncertain, such as sensory sensitivities to touch and sound, motor and movement disturbances, sleep deprivation, allergies, and gastrointestinal issues. So these are all very common challenges that an autistic person or an autistic child will experience in their day-to-day life. And that is why their body is almost in a constant state of dysregulation and why they have to participate in stimming behavior to help regulate their system and feel better in their body. The other function of stimming behavior is sensory processing or sensory input. So it could be that a person is stimming in a certain way simply because it feels good. They like the way it feels, right? And they enjoy it. It's just something that they enjoy to do and it feels good and that's why they're doing it. Or maybe it's a response to their sensory system being overstimulated. And so they're trying to help calm or regulate their body with the stimming. Or maybe it's an autistic person who has decreased ability to sense, to perceive their senses inside of their body. They are stimming as a way to be able to feel their body more. So these are all reasons that an autistic child might be stimming, and certainly more so than a neurotypical child. A child that's flapping his hands could be because this is the only way I know that my hands are at the ends of my arms. We read In Two Worlds by Ido Kedar, who is a non-speaking autistic author, and it was a fiction book, but it was loosely based on his own experiences. And his main challenge was that he actually didn't have language delays. He could understand what was said to him perfectly well. It was his motor system was so impacted that that was what was so challenging, that he couldn't communicate. He really couldn't control his body. And he would describe the little boy, Anthony, in that book. He would have descriptions of Anthony stimming. He would say, call it being in autism land, which was really him like stimming a lot. And the reason most of the time he went to autism land was to either escape the environment that he was in because it was too much for him, either physically or emotionally. Right? Remember that quote from Barry Present? Um, or to help, like he needed to do that to know that his hands were still there, or he would jump hard on the ground to know that he wasn't going to float off into space. So that stimming really was necessary for him to help ground his body and to feel where his body was because his sensory system was so dysregulated and and was not operating the way that it should. A child who's overwhelmed by noises in the environment. So some autistic individuals are so highly sensitive to sound, they can hear things that we don't hear. So maybe there's a buzzing of your refrigerator that you are able to drown out, but his brain, the way it's wired, and his sensory system cannot drown that out. So maybe he has a lot of vocal stims and he makes a lot of noises because being in control, it will drown out the sound that he doesn't have control over and is stressing his body and his sensory system out and his nervous system out. And he makes his own noise, or whatever the noise is, because it drowns it out and he has control over the noises that he makes himself. So they're more regulating and grounding and calming for the nervous system. If we hear a child doing this and we say, quiet, no, no, quiet, we are basically saying, no, 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 you have to endure that noise that is making you want to rip your hair out of your head because you need to be quiet. So, this is why we need to really let our children stim because it's necessary. They need it to feel okay in their body most of the time. Coping skills. Remember when I said about the character in Two Worlds, Anthony would go into autism land to escape because when he was in his classroom or at home or in any whatever environment, but especially at school, he would feel so frustrated that they were asking him to do these baby tasks that he knew, but he couldn't demonstrate that he knew. And it was such a infuriating and depressive situation for him that he had to go through this academic experience that was so below his actual ability level that he would just escape into autism land because it was the only way he could get through it. Now, again, that's a fictional story, but it's coming from a non speaking autistic author who had these experiences and experienced that for himself. It was really interesting to read that, and it really just highlighted to me even more why stims are a coping mechanism. On top of that, autistic individuals are much more prone to anxiety than than their neurotypical peers. And they are much more likely to be in a state of fight, flight, and freeze throughout the day. And that is when your nervous system is on high alert. And when your nervous system is on high alert, it basically is telling your body, you're in danger, you're about to die. Okay. And there's only three ways that it responds, four technically: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And that's it. The part of your brain that can make good rational decisions goes offline, and your brain goes into primitive protection mode. And so a child that has autism is in that state more than a neurotypical child, and stimming helps them feel better. Stimming helps them feel calmer because they're in this constant state like this. That leads me to maybe some questions you might be asking yourself. You might be saying, like, okay, this all makes sense. I get it. I'm on board. I want to be supportive of my child's sensory needs, their coping needs, their social emotional needs. But what can I do when my child's stimming really just gets in the way of their ability to engage or connect with others? Or I feel like the more they stim, the less engaged that they are. So, what can I do in those situations? So, I have a couple of tips for you, things that have worked for me over the years with my students that tend to have a greater need for stimming than some of my other students. You can join in with their stim with genuine curiosity with the intent to discover what it is about this stim that's appealing to him or her about the stim. and you're joining in and really trying to engage in it yourself near your child. Okay. And you're not going to do it for 2 seconds, then be like, look at me. What am I doing? What am I doing? Like that's defeating the purpose. You're going to just sit there and stim with your child. You're going to join them in the activity that they like to do because that is a way to connect with them. And you never know, they might end up looking over at you and smiling. That's engagement, that's connection. And you smile back. That's co regulation. And then from there, the more that you do that, the more you might be able to turn it into a more interactive exchange or activity. So that is one thing you could try doing and see how it goes. But again, you're not doing it in like, I don't want to say manipulative, but with um, a ulterior motive. That's what I was trying to find. Ulterior motive of, I'm going to do this for 2 minutes just to get him to talk. Like, really just go into it with a mind of curiosity to figure out what it is about this stim that my child might find regulating or enjoyable so that you can understand your child more. And you're doing it parallel with him or her. And then hopefully he or she will show interest in you as you do it. The other thing you can do is you can try to find activities or toys that satisfy the same need that your child is getting from the stim, the same sensory need. So if your child really likes to watch things spin, right? So maybe he loves holding a fidget spinner and watching it spin out of the corner of their eye. Try to find toys that incorporate that spinning activity, because then you're giving your child the sensory stimulation or input that they need or enjoy by watching the spinning, but it's in a more interactive context or a context that will lend itself towards more language and communication. So you'll be able to engage with your child more as opposed to if he's just stimming with looking at the fidget spinner, and that's a very solitary activity. So that's something that I've done over the years, and that's worked really well for me with my students in getting them to enjoy engaging in a joint activity with me. You can engage in co-regulation games. So this is I'm probably going to have to do a whole video on co-regulation games because this is it's a tricky thing to figure out, but you can certainly search for this. It's an RDI strategy, relationship development intervention strategy. And I would say that it has worked like a charm for me, especially with my students that have a high level of vocal stimming. And what I do in these co-regulation activities is I take the verbal communication out of the equation almost altogether or dial it back down to very minimal actual spoken communication, and we work on doing co-regulation is basically matching your emotions or it can be matching your emotional state with another person. It could be matching your movements with another person. An example I always like to give is imagine that you're moving a large piece of furniture, right? A big kitchen table, and you do it with your best friend that you've been best friends with since you were 5. She's your bestie. You can just communicate by looking at each other, and you move this table, and you can move this huge, heavy table probably without even saying a word to each other because that's being co-regulated. You can match what that person's going to do. If they change what they're going to do, you're with them. That is co-regulation. So to be co-regulated with another person, you have to be outside of yourself and with that other person. You have to be thinking about that other person, and that other person is thinking about you, and you're doing it together. It's an equal exchange. Now imagine that you're doing that same moving of the table with your spouse after you just had a major blowout. And I'm sure you've been in this situation before where all of a sudden, so you're not co regulated at all. You guys are not on the same page. And all of a sudden, moving that same table is a very challenging task. He's going left, you're going right. He's got up, you're going down. And it's just not. And then all of a sudden, you're bickering and arguing. So that's an example of not being co regulated. When we do co regulation activities as a strategy to work with your autistic child, I like to start with taking a walk down the hall. And this is also great for if you have a child that likes to bolt away from you. It really teaches them to stay with you and check in with you and stay with you while you're walking. And I usually start with holding the hand of the child that I'm working with. And you just walk, stop, wait for the child to kind of reference you in some way, and then you nod and you keep moving forward. And then you can start to add to that activity by changing the way you walk. And all of a sudden, that child is starting to match your movements too. And I have a student that I did this with who he was constantly chattering about something that whatever narrative was going through his brain and he was vocalizing it. And when we would do the co regulation walk, I would do it from the classroom to our speech room. We would do a lot of work in the OT room, and our school had these really great long hallways. So we had a long walk from the speech room to the OT room. And the vocal stimming would stop because he was really engaged and connected to what I was doing so that he could match it. The added benefit is that it totally strengthened our relationship with each other and our rapport. So co-regulation activities are great for that. I will certainly do another video and another day about co-regulation. I am such a big fan of it. Another resource you can check out, Linda Murphy. I have it right here. She has a book called the Co-Regulation Handbook. This is another great resource. It's not very long, so check that out as well. The other thing we can do to, if you have a child that has a high need for stimming, is make sure that you are providing a lifestyle and an environment that is so sensory rich and fulfilling to their needs. So maybe we need to implement a sensory diet throughout the day because we don't want to just give our kids sensory input when they're dysregulated. We want to help give them the amount of sensory input they need to maintain regulation throughout the day. We don't want them to go without it until they're dysregulated and then we're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at it to help get them back to a regulated state. If you are providing really consistent sensory input throughout the day, throughout the learning environment, throughout the home environment, in the community, then you might find that there will be an overall decrease in their need to stim because they might not need as much sensory input from the stim and they might not need to regulate themselves as much by stimming. So maybe you're asking yourself, what if my child's stim is dangerous or not safe or self-injurious? So these are the only stims that I would say we want to reshape or redirect because they're safety concerns, right? So what we want to do is we really want to ask ourselves, well, like what's causing this stim? Like what is the why behind this stim? Could it be environmentally related? Remember that the example I gave about the child that's triggered by the noise that the refrigerator is making? If maybe that child was responding to that by like banging their head, then that would be an example of an environmental trigger to us unsafe behavior. So maybe we could do things like give noise canceling headphones. Maybe we could look at, if you can afford it, getting a new fridge that doesn't make the same noise. But the fact of the matter is we can then try to change the environmental thing that will help the child feel more regulated, more safe in their nervous system so that they don't have to engage in that stim that's not safe. Is it health related? Did the stim just pop up seemingly overnight? So when I hear that of a behavior or a stimming behavior from a family that it just started out of nowhere, and especially if the child has a decreased ability to communicate their wants and needs or communicate their inner body states, I always ask, is it health related? Is it possible they have allergies? Can they have an earache? Can they have a toothache? Something of that nature. Is it possible they have a headache? So we want to put our detective hats on and find out like what is the why behind this self-injurious or unsafe stimming behavior, because if it's something external outside of the child that we have the power to change, then we will do it. We can do that. And that in and of itself could be helpful. An example of this, I worked with a student that when we would walk down the hallways, all of a sudden he would bolt away from me, bolt away into a classroom, and we realized it was because he knew exactly which classrooms had fans. It all of a sudden it started happening when the weather got warmer, right? So he knew exactly which classrooms had fans and he liked looking at the fans. And so once I made that connection that he was running into these classrooms because he wanted to stim on the fans, we actually changed the bolting behavior, not the need to look at the fan. We changed the bolting behavior by teaching him to say, fan, please, or go in. So I started teaching him the language to use to ask me if he could go in so that he could go to the fan, because the bolting away was not safe. So that's what we wanted to stop. I didn't necessarily want to stop the stimming on the fan. I wanted to stop him bolting away from me because that's not safe. What if we were outside and he bolted away into the street? We don't. So I worked on teaching him that communication that he needed so that it could be a safer experience and he could still get that satisfaction of looking at the fan. That's just an example of how I've used it in my career. And the easiest thing for us to do is identify some sort of external factor that is in our power and ability to adjust or change for the child so that they aren't feeling the need to be self injurious or to engage in whatever unsafe behavior that they're doing. Another thing you might want to ask yourself is, what is my child getting from this stim, and how can I provide that same need, that same experience to fulfill whatever need it is that they're getting in a safer way? So, for example, let's say your child is biting their arm and it's really causing a lot of damage to the skin on their arm. Maybe what you can do is, maybe they need that biting and that's the need it's fulfilling. So maybe you could get an arm guard for him to bite on so his arm is staying safe, but he's still getting the ability to get that frustration out or whatever it is that he needs to express by that biting. Or maybe you can offer some sort of chewy tube, or they have something called jewelry. So it's like chewy tubes basically that you can wear as a necklace or as a bracelet. And so is there a way that we can provide something else for him to chew on, him or her to chew on, so that the arm is not getting bit up and causing, cuts on the arms and infections and all of that? Maybe there's something that a sensory feeling in the arms, and putting compression gear on his arms would be helpful, so that I keep saying him, so I mean he or she, um, so that they're getting, whoever it is getting that sensory input that they need on the arms without the unsafe behavior of the bite. Maybe a child has a stimming behavior of screaming because they really like the way it sounds. Can you make a recording of him screaming and have him listen to it on his headphones? I had an adult that I worked with. She was in her 20s and she would have this need to send audio text to the providers that she worked with. And we communicated outside of sessions via text. It was one of the effective ways that we were able to work together and help her carry over our strategies. But just sending an audio saying my name over and over and over and over again. And so I worked with her saying, I I don't know what you're looking for from me when you send me that. So if you can send me a sentence letting me know what it is that you're needing in that moment, then I'll know how to respond to you. And then the other thing we said was, if you are feeling like you just need to get that out, saying my name over and over again, can you use the voice memo in your phone? Because the other thing is, she was getting stressed out about the fact that the iPhone does this thing where all of a sudden it'll send a notification to you saying so and so saved an audio file from you. And that was like making her anxious and she didn't enjoy that it made her feel like I was saving the audio to use it in a way, but it was just a feature of the phone. So I'm like, can you just say the names over and over again into your voice memo app? And if you need to hear it, you can press play and hear it, or you can say it as much as you need to in there so that when you do text me, you can access the words that you need to use. And it actually worked really, really well. And she stopped doing that. And we were able to have more functional interchanges in our texts as a result. So these are all just some ideas and suggestions. They're so, every child is different, every stim is different, every situation is different. So really focus in on the questions to ask yourself and getting at the why behind things. And then if you want some ideas or help brainstorming and you feel comfortable, maybe in the comments below, like say, "Oh, Rebecca, what ideas would you suggest in this situation?" And I'd be happy to give some suggestions based on the limited information that you provide. But you need to run the experiment. Try to keep an open mind. Like with the screaming example, you might think to yourself, well, I don't want to reinforce that screaming behavior. Okay, I hear you, and let's give it a try. Maybe satisfying his need to hear the scream will satiate him to the point where he doesn't need to do it anymore. That's a possible outcome. Just because you allow someone to do the thing doesn't mean that they're going to want to do it all the time. What we resist persists. So the more someone is told they can't do something, the more enticing it becomes. So let's just run the experiment, see what happens. And the thing is, we also want to give time and consistency for these things to work. So obviously, if your child is vehemently opposed to a strategy that you try right away, like don't persist with that. But if you might need to reintroduce a strategy more than once or twice. So give it a week or two and then see how it goes. And if we see improvement over time, that's an indication that it's working and you should continue with it. If you're not really seeing any change in that, or you're seeing an increase after you try it for a week or two, then that is an indication that, okay, maybe this isn't the best strategy and we need to try something new. But I encourage you to keep an open mind, run the experiment. If you like today's video, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe. When you subscribe, it really helps my channel grow so that this content can get in front of the people that need to see it. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Bye.